our work. Let me share the screen first, then we will go from there to the final part of this lectures about the SDLC. We still let us go to the slides. Take the slides down. Okay, and here we go now to the work which we started before. And we have here the project documentation. We start for product documentation for project plan development. In the project documentation, we will depend on the size and the complexity of the project, justify the time spent on documentation on the grounds of managing risk and for marketing, recommended items, a project plan for the overall project, a detailed project plans, also a list of initial known issues for the project, who is responsible, a description of the interfaces between sub-projects, a description of the rules of organization involved in the project. So this we will do. We also have a winning plan. Are the object and the scope consistent? There is a consistency and harmony between, and they are matching with each other, the objective of the project and the scope of the project. Is the scope reflected in the range of tasks? Is the strategy used borne out in the tasks? Have you identified the areas of risk? So we have to do all this. We have to check for the consistency of the scope and the objective. We have to see if the scope must reflect in the range of tasks. We have to make sure that the strategy is borne out in the tasks. We have to identify the areas of the tasks. We have to define the key resources. We have to associate, see the check for the tasks. Are they associated that carry risk, or the tasks are risk included? The estimation of them is including the risk or no? If you were assigned to the job of attacking the plan, what would you see as the major weakness? So look to the project with an eye of a criticizer, to not your eyes, because your eyes you will admire it, but look with eyes of a criticizer to check out what is missing in the plan so that you can go on it and complete it. Some guidelines build a plan with great details on the near-term task, but less than these details for tasks that are further out in the future. So be more focused about the upcoming days in the tasks, but the tasks, and give it more priority for the tasks which will come out in advance. Take a project and divide it into phases. Like we said before, the work breakdown. Remain sensitive to the environment. Be sensitive to the environment. Like we have to check the environment all around us. Political environment, social environment, all the types of environments around us. You should make sure that you are consistent with the changes. Any change that happen in the environment, you should be very worried about and you should care about. And of course, you will do estimations for these changes wherever they are. So you will calculate risk and you will put scenarios, alternate scenarios, in cases of the in case of there's risk with different degrees or different concepts. So you have to calculate for the risk. A risk if it is very mild, if it is very strong, if it is weak in its impact, and also the frequency of the risk you have to be very worried about. Minimize the documentations as much as you can. Analyze the risk at the start of the project. use a chart to create a picture of the whole project. The final thing is the feedback. So we call it a status check. Does your firm follow an established sequences of steps in developing project plan? Are you doing these steps which is mentioned here or no? Secondly, how are small projects handled differently from large projects in your company? So are you giving the same considerations, like same steps for planning for the large project? Likewise, the same steps for planning for a small project? If you have to develop a new project plan, what guidelines, templates, and other supports are offered in your organization? What you will do? Simply, I will go back for project documentation, and we'll see a video about project documentation. Project documentation, you will see a video right now. It might make it easier for us to check out. Here we go.
In the last video, we discussed safe file storage. In this video, we'll summarize documenting key parts of your project workflow. Data documentation starts during collection and continues throughout the time you work with the data.
So here as example, you see the data life cycle. The data life cycle will start with planning, collecting, processing, analyzing, sharing, archiving for the archive. So that's how it works. Okay.
Including when performing quality assurance and analysis. We'll focus on documenting important parts of your workflow to help you share information about your project with your advisor, write your thesis, and to ensure your data are useful later. Documenting your project, process, and data takes time. Why do it? You can get a lot of details floating around out of your head so that you can focus on your research. Documentation helps you avoid forgetting important considerations. Reproducing and improving workflows in the future becomes easier. Other researchers and collaborators can find the right data and use them properly. Clear and detailed documentation is essential.
So here, let us go for a question right now about this part. And say here, we'll go for a new slide. Why do we need project documentation? Why do we need project documentation? And the answer, like you see here right now in front of you, here is the answer of this question. I will leave it for you just a few minutes, but I will put it for you also in here in this slides. I'll take a slide now. This is the answer of it. Why documentation? So you can take it from here, or you can search Google if you want for extra answers. That's fine. You are fine then. So you are very fine. So this is why documentation to get details of the work, to avoid forgetting important considerations, to easier to produce and improve workflow later, to know the phases, each phase and the next phase and so on, Other can find the right data and use properly those data. So those are the reasons why we do the documentation, why we do the documentation process. Let's complete the video then.
For data to be understood, interpreted, and used. Documenting your data from the beginning of a research project will make your research career easier. So what should be documented? Documentation can be used to describe your research projects at different levels. High-level documentation explains your research goals and the progress of your project. Low-level documentation explains the details of the data, how it has been collected, stored, and changed over time.
So those are the two types of documentation, high-level documentation and low-level documentation. So here we go. Let us say here also I will add here another a new slide. What are the types of documentation you need for a project? What are the types of the documentation you need for the project? And the answer, I will put it on the next slide. The answer on the next slide should be like this. Here we go. High-level documentation and low-level documentation. So it will be both of those. High-level documentation, what to document. Here we go. And low-level documentation. This is the answer of this question. What shall we document? We have two parts, like we said here, or like she said here. High-level documentation, and this site is very recommended. The website link is there, so you can see it here, the link of the website of that website. So I recommend you to go to this video and watch it whenever you can.
Project documentation explains your rationale and context for data collection, your research questions or hypothesis, data sources, collection methodology and protocols, data validation and quality assurance actions, the transformation of raw or derived data for integration or analysis, and data confidentiality, access, and use condition. You should recognize many of these topics.
So those are the main documentation which we have to use for our own project. Also,
these topics also should sound familiar from earlier videos. You may find it helpful to review the videos about data entry, data formatting, data manipulation, describing data, and file organization as you plan and prepare your dataset documentation. So now we have an idea of why and what to document for a project. What about the how and where? This can vary a great deal with the type of project. It's a great idea to consult with your advisor, but here are a few ideas. Use a lab notebook or note files. These can be either physical paper notebooks and files or electronic. Just be sure to document what is located where to save time hunting for it later. README files are primarily aimed at an external audience and your future self rather than ongoing note-taking. They may be less concerned with project-level documentation and more with the documenting the dataset and data element level. A README text file is the classic way of accounting for all the files and folders in a project. See the references at the end of this video for more details. Data dictionaries and...
So here we say about also the data, how to document the data for your own documentation.
Today, we're talking about how to write a scope of work document. And with that, I want to talk about some must practices. But before we start, I want to clarify what the scope of work document is. Some people you may hear it referenced as the SOW. Basically, it's an agreement on the work to be performed on the project. It includes what deliverables are produced, or maybe even products or any results. It also includes the timeline for this project, as well as important and critical milestones and different types of reports that are needed, and specifically who those reports go to. I recommend using a template, and most templates include these things: the glossary, a glossary of terms defining what the terms are that will be referenced in this SOW. Also, the problem statement, a little bit more detail about the problem and what we're trying to solve. It also includes the goals, and it includes the objectives and deliverables that we'll be producing. It also includes any kind of administration information about the project, as well as the timeline. So some people reference best practices, and in this case, I call these the must practices. So number one, be specific. You want to be specific when you're clarifying or defining terms so that everyone has a clear understanding and common understanding of what the terms are. You also want to be specific when you're defining who does what and by when. You want to, by doing this, you're avoiding some of the traps, which could be confusion, like who's doing what and when, or what things mean, or miscommunications, which ultimately can lead to some disputes. You also want to.
So you have to be, when you are documenting, you have to be very specific, the meaning of the terms, who does what, by when. You have to answer the WHs, where, when, what. Use visuals as much as you can. What will it look like in the end? And what will people be able to do in the end? Actually, she's very smart in the way she's presenting. Picture is worth a sound word. You have the link also for this video. You can watch it whenever you can. Get sign off. Ensure authorized approval sign off on critical milestones and deliverables, traps, selective amnesia, and disputes rework. So those are, avoid those traps, like this example here, avoid confusion, miscommunication, disputes. Here, avoid misinterpretations. So each stage you have to also avoid those parts. So this was about the documenting the project, and that's very nice to watch it. You have here the how to write a scope of work document, and this, like, it's very nice, and also is having many views. So I think that you can go to the site and watch it again to get use of the documenting. There are a lot of videos about the documenting, but I think here is more than enough that we know about the documenting today and the winning plan, and we know about the status check. And we had questions also about the documenting system. So I will put in the last slide I will see here. I will write. What did you come to learn? What did you come to learn about project documentation? What did you come to learn about project documentation? So what did you come to learn about the project documentation today? How to do this work, and which things should be documented, and which works is to be documented first, and how to document the phases, how to document the milestones. All these are in our own consideration. So what did you come to learn about project documentation today in this lecture? Thank you so much. Stay safe, take care of yourself. We'll see you by the next video. Thanks a lot.